place that has been with us from the very beginning and supportive of us from the very beginning. Plymouth Church is a special place, an open and affirming church, a green church that cares for the earth as God's creation, and a peace and justice church, and it's my church. My pastor is thinking that's sometimes good news and sometimes bad news. I want to thank the good people of Plymouth Church for opening their doors to us tonight. And of course, my pastor, John Gardner. And John, you want to come and say a word?
Yes, it is my burden. On behalf of Plymouth Church, its members and friends, my colleague and associate in ministry, the Reverend Ruth Phillips, I bring welcome words of greeting this evening. Special welcome to Cindy and Craig Corrie, who are featured in this evening's program. I'm anxious to hear and learn more of your work preserving the memory, hope, and courage displayed in your daughter's life and your daughter's death. May you find warmth here. May you be encouraged here for the struggle for peace and justice that we all share. Michael alluded to it, and I'm going to mention it. I have watched the work of the Indiana Center for Middle East Peace from its humble beginnings, even when it was an idea in the heart of Michael Spath, Executive Director, 9 years ago. I think it was in 2005 that, accompanied with Fred Haseke and some other pilgrims, that we made a study and solidarity tour to the Holy Land, and one of our stops was the village of Ibilin, northern Israel, a few miles east of the coastal city of Haifa, northern Israel. There we visited the Mar Elias School, and there's a church there. It's the Church of the Sermon on the Mount, and the pastor there was Elias Shakur. We know him as Abuna. He's been here to Fort Wayne. He's been here to this sanctuary, and he's now a bishop, archbishop, I don't know, Melkite Catholic, serving in the Holy Land. In that church, on the lower level, I remember a mural. This is in 2005. The Abuna had constructed this church, had just been dedicated. In the lower level, there's this mural. And as I recall, help me out here, I remember there being representatives of peace seekers and justice makers. And there was, I think Martin Luther King was on that. I think Gandhi was on there. And there was a picture of Rachel Corrie, whose untimely death in Gaza had captured world attention. And it's a reminder to me, and the program this evening is a reminder, that pursuits for peace and justice are not for the faint of heart. It's costly work, testing the mettle, family and friends. It brings life. It can exact death. So I just want to publicly acknowledge the efforts of the Indiana Center for Middle East Peace. They've stayed resolute from their beginnings to educate, engage, and enlighten on issues relating to human rights, and it is to be commended. So I say thank you, Dr. Spath, thanks to the Indiana Center for Middle East Peace Board of Directors, all who support the efforts making evenings such as this possible. Welcome, and if you have any issues with the facility, knowing where to go or what's right or what's wrong, speak to Mike. He's a member.
Thank you, John, I think. I want to call your attention to some of our upcoming programs. Thursday, January 23rd, my colleague at IPFW, Dr. Noor Borbieva, will be talking about the state of Russia-U.S. relations at Beacon Heights Church of the Brethren. You have some of this information on your handout tonight. We have programs for the year in invited afterwards. Tuesday, February 4th, Jewish psychologist and good friend Mark Braverman makes his second appearance within a year among us right here at the Plymouth Church, discussing his new book, A Wall in Jerusalem, Hope, Healing, and the Struggle for Justice in Israel and Palestine. On February 17th and 18th, at the Unitarian Universalist congregation, we'll be watching and discussing the film Half the Sky, 2 nights in a row, about girls and women from all over the world who are triumphing in very difficult circumstances. And at the end of February, we host distinguished NPR journalist Greg Meyer, who'll be discussing his book, This Burning Land, Lessons from the Front Lines of the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. We have a really good lineup in January and February, a strong lineup, and we encourage you to come. Finally, if you're interested in finding out more about our next trip to Israel and Palestine, just speak to me afterward tonight. We'll be having an information meeting soon. We're able to do what we do, friends, hosting courageous advocates for peace and justice like Craig and Cindy Corrie, because of your generous financial support. We encourage you as the year draws to a close to think of us when you want to make an end-of-the-year contribution. We are delighted tonight to be hosting Craig and Cindy Corrie. They did not ask to be peace and justice advocates and activists in Israel and Palestine. This issue was thrust upon them in a horrific, brutal, and tragic way 10 years ago. 10 years ago already. It's really hard to believe. It's been 10 years. In March of 2003, when their 23-year-old daughter Rachel was run over by an Israeli bulldozer multiple times as she was attempting to nonviolently protest a home from demolition in the Gaza Strip. Since then, Craig and Cindy have been tireless in their efforts to educate, advocate, and inspire others by keeping Rachel's legacy alive. I want to invite you to give tonight to the Rachel Corrie Foundation for Peace and Justice. Every dime that you donate tonight, every dime that you give, will be designated for the Rachel Corrie Foundation. Please make your checks out to Indiana Center for Middle East Peace, and then we can collate them and write them one check at the end of the evening for Cindy and Craig. Also, I want to thank both Dr. Pat Ashton and the IPFW Peace and Conflict Studies Program and the National Jewish Voice for Peace, who are co-sponsors for tonight's event. So thank you to IPFW and Pat Ashton and Jewish Voice for Peace. I hope you had a chance to read the quote on the screen tonight. From her journals near the end of her life, just very briefly. You can always hear the tanks and bulldozers passing by, Rachel writes, but all these people are genuinely cheerful with each other and with me. When I'm with Palestinian friends, I tend to be somewhat less horrified than when I'm trying to act in a role of human rights observer, documenter, or direct action resistor. They're a good example of how to be in it for the long haul. I know the situation gets to them and may ultimately get them on all kinds of levels, but I'm nevertheless amazed at their strength in being able to defend such a large degree of their humanity, laughter, generosity, family time, against the incredible horror occurring in their lives and against the constant presence of death. I felt much better after this morning. I spent a lot of time writing about the disappointment of discovering, somewhat firsthand, the degree of evil of which we are still capable. I should at least mention that I'm also discovering a degree of strength and a basic ability for humans to remain human in the direst of circumstances, which I also haven't seen before. I think the word is dignity. I wish you could meet these people. Maybe, hopefully, someday you will. Friends, it's my real honor and delight to ask you to welcome Cindy and Craig Corrie.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you to all of you for being here this evening. We are so grateful for the opportunity to be in your community, in this warm and welcoming community. We are so inspired by the work of Indiana Center for Middle East Peace. Thank you to Plymouth Church for your very kind and helpful words. We arrived here yesterday, and we have had the pleasure of meeting people throughout these 2 days. And we're very comfortable being in the Midwest. Both Craig and I were born in Iowa and grew up in Iowa. We still have ties there. So it's wonderful to drive through this Midwestern landscape again and to feel the kind of hospitality that is very unique to this part of the country. And we thank you for letting us be the recipients of that. I'd especially like to thank Frank and Judy Wright, who are our wonderful homestay host for this stay here. Our story begins with Rachel. I hope tonight that Craig and I can help you further understand. I know you've been learning a great deal, but why this issue is so critical to all of us here in the United States, as well as to the people of the people in the Middle East and the people of the world. The U.S. has a particularly complicit role in what is happening there and what has been happening there for decades. And we are all implicated because of the special relationship, because of the financial relationship. So many U.S. tax dollars going every year to fund the U.S. military. What is happening there, of course, has a tremendous impact on Palestinians who live oppressed under Israeli military occupation, and even those who live inside Israel live as second-class citizens with numerous laws that discriminate against them. But this is also very damaging to Israelis, and we've had the gift of working with Jewish Israelis, with Palestinian Israelis, who have helped us to see that they need our help in resolving this. And they see that what's going on is doing great damage to them and to their society. And of course, it's also doing great damage to us as Americans in terms of our relationship with the rest of the world. This is something that Craig and I hear over and over again as we travel in the Middle East. We hope that what we can share with you, what Rachel can share with you, will help you to just learn and think a bit more, to draw your own conclusions, but then very much to act. I have to say that this is an inspired, I think, community. Indiana Center for Middle East Peace is an inspired and inspiring organization. I wish we could clone you and take you to all the places in the United States where Craig and I have had the privilege of speaking. I thank Michael for his leadership and his deep caring for the people of the Middle East and for his commitment to this. Craig and I have worked for nearly 10 years now on Israel and Palestine. Rachel brought us to this issue. We made frequent trips during these past 10 years to the Middle East. We have been to Gaza 5 times, 2 times traveling through the one exit from Israel into Gaza through Erez checkpoint, and 3 times traveling through the Egyptian Sinai through Rafah crossing into Gaza. And we were very privileged to be able to do that because most of the people within Gaza struggle to be able to move in and out of the very small Gaza Strip. The last time that Craig and I were there was in November of 2012, and we were leaving as Israeli bombs began to fall during Operation Pillar of Cloud. We heard 3 bombs in the night before our bus took us out of the Gaza Strip, and it was very difficult to leave, not knowing what was going to be coming after that. We are so blessed with our connections to the people of Israel, Palestinian and Israeli Jews, and in the West Bank, in Gaza, and to to all the Palestinians in the diaspora, and to all of you who care so deeply about this issue. We co-founded the Rachel Corrie Foundation for Peace and Justice with community members in Olympia, Washington, where we live. We have continued Rachel's work with her spirit in mind. We are a small 501c3 nonprofit. I deeply appreciate, I know the foundation will deeply appreciate your generosity tonight. It's so kind, again, of the Indiana Center for Middle East Peace to ask for you to make contributions to the Rachel Corrie Foundation. We have a small office in downtown Olympia. Craig and I are full-time volunteers. We have a very small staff. We work with a lot of wonderful undergraduate and graduate student interns and volunteers. Through education, connection, support for grassroots activism, and use of art and the written word, we advocate for universal human rights and for peace with justice in Israel-Palestine. We have a lot of different projects going on. The Olympia Rafah Solidarity Mural Project is one that I hope you'll come and see, because we have the largest, I think, Palestinian solidarity mural in the world on one of our downtown buildings. And not only is it celebrating our solidarity with the Palestinian people and those in Israel who advocate for peace with justice, it also is connecting social justice issues. We have artists and organizations represented in the mural reflecting social justice organizations in our community that work on all kinds of social justice issues, but feel that they are in solidarity with the Palestinian people and with the Israelis who support them. And we also have Israeli artists, Israeli organizations like Who Profits, Combatants for Peace, and others. It's an extraordinary artistic feat. We'd love to have you come and see it, and we continue to use it as an organizing tool. We bring speakers like you're doing right now. We had the pleasure just a week or so ago of hosting Yehuda Shaul. I want to mention him specifically. He is a former Israeli soldier who, after his term of service, formed or co-founded Breaking the Silence. Israeli soldiers who are speaking out about their actions in the West Bank and Gaza. And they are doing it not so much to speak to us, but more to speak to their community in Israel, to say, you do not know this is what you're asking us to do. You are really unaware of what the consequences of it are, and you need to know. And they're speaking out. They do a lot of speaking and exhibits in inside Israel. They have a new book called Our Harsh Logic that analyzes the activities that these young people have been ordered to do. And I just would encourage you to get a copy and learn about it more. We take delegations, not as many as you have, but we have taken delegations to Gaza. Craig and I have participated in several. In our area, there are a lot of bus ads circulating in Seattle and other city buses about this issue. And the Rachel Corrie Foundation posted an ad inside buses in Olympia earlier this year, with this slogan, "Equal rights for Palestinians, the way to peace." We've just started hosting a young man from Gaza, Anis Mansour. He was a friend of our daughter's. He has been the coordinator at the Rachel Corrie Center, Cultural Center, Children's Cultural Center in Rafah, and he is part of a new program in Olympia. He'll be with us for 3 months with the Leadership Studies Fellowship. And we have other Gaza projects. We work on the Maya water purification, the Ramadan football tournament, and this is a photo of when we were welcome to be at a ceremony around the Ramadan football tournament that is named for Rachel. It's held in Rafah in the southern part of Gaza. We have scholarships, and we're also supporters of BDS, boycotts, divestment, and sanctions, which we view as a nonviolent, peaceful, time-honored tool for addressing intractable issues. This has been going on too long, and governments have failed us. It's time, we believe, for citizens to take action. And there was a Palestinian call in 2005 for us to do that. And we, along with many others, have supported BDS. The Olympia Food Co-op received a lot of attention when it took products from Israel off its shelves. And this is just a demonstration of some of the solidarity for our Olympia Food Co-op. I urge you to go to our website, to also join our mailing list if you would like more information about the work that we're doing. But all of this begins with Rachel. Rachel was born in Olympia, Washington. She wrote, "I was born under the ram. I'm an Aries, a fire sign. I was born with a fire in my belly." Rachel was a daughter and sister. She wrote, "My name is Rachel Corrie. I was born on April 10th, 1979 in Olympia, Washington to my mother and father, Craig and Cindy Corrie, a brother, Chris, who was about 7, a sister, Sarah, my mother and father, Craig and Cindy Corrie, a brother, Chris, who was about 7, and who was 2 years younger, and a really old cat named Phoebe. Rachel was my 3rd child. She wrote in 1996 about me. And she said, "I can feel my mom. I can see her silver hair fanning out from under a hat when we had snowball fights on the days they canceled school. I can see her lips trembling as she read the birthday card I made her last year. I can hear her at the end of a dock in Minnesota playing her flute for the mist and the reeds and the dragonflies sleeping on the lily pads." Rachel was a reader and a thinker, given to making lists. She wrote, "5 people I wish I'd met who are dead. Salvador Dali, Carl Jung, MLK, JFK, Josephine. 5 people to hang out with in eternity. Rainier M. Rilke, Jesus, E.E. Cummings, Gertrude Stein, Zelda Fitzgerald. 6, Charlie Chaplin." She was a writer and an artist. And she said, "I write because in some secret compartment in my brain, this little ironclad woman keeps screaming, 'It's all you have.'" She wrote, "Writing is brave. It is maybe the only brave thing about me." Rachel's story has unfolded on stages throughout the world in the play My Name is Rachel Corrie. It was all her writing, edited by the actor Alan Rickman and Guardian editor Catherine Viner. It's been in multiple languages, in Arabic, in Haifa, Nazareth, and in Jaffa, and in Hebrew in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Craig and I have had the pleasure of hearing it in French in Brussels, Icelandic in Reykjavik, Turkish in Istanbul. We have the gift of Rachel's writing in this book, Let Me Stand Alone, the Journals of Rachel Corrie, published by W.W. Norton in 2008. We do have copies here available after this talk. Rachel went to Olympia schools. She attended and graduated from the Evergreen State College in Olympia, and in June of 2003, Craig and I accepted her diploma posthumously. From high school on, she volunteered for the Olympia Crisis Clinic. In college, she worked for behavioral health resources, and she created a drop-ins program for people in our community that struggled to go out into the community. And she wrote about the homeless. Here are the homeless, and also the nameless. Here are the people whom we politely ignore. We are brutally well behaved. Even when they speak to us, call to us, beseech us, we do not answer or call back. These are our sisters and brothers, and that is what terrifies us. They are us, and we could as easily be them. Rachel loved the Pacific Northwest woods, Perry Creek, where we lived, Puget Sound, the Cascade and Olympic Mountains, and the sea. She was a poet, and at 10 years of age she wrote, "I must walk with care as I wander in the wood, that I may crush no flower below my shoes." And as a college student, she wrote about where we live in Puget Sound, and she said, Perry Creek winds its way out of forest roads and lookouts near Rock Candy. In the winter, the salmon come back purpling and fight upstream. In the summer, the rushes grow so tall you can hide in them and be completely invisible. This is where I came from, tunnels through rushes. I could spend all the light hours of all the days in tunnels through rushes in the middle of the estuary at the mouth of Perry Creek. So what took Rachel to Gaza? She was a sibling to exchange students from Brazil, Russia, and Japan, students who lived in our home and broadened her horizons about the world. She was fortunate, privileged, she would say, as a high school and college student to have experiences in Russia, Eastern Europe, and Belize. But it was 9/11 that was a real turning point for her, and she worked very hard to understand what had happened. And as the United States turned to war as a response, Rachel turned to her community. In 2002, with others, she created a flock of doves for our Olympia Procession of the Species, an event that honors all of life. And she wrote, "I've danced down the street with 40 people from the ages of 7 to 70 dressed as doves. In a lot of ways, I think the procession is a value statement. I'm happy to see a peace message included in that. I think it's important for people who oppose war and repression to speak about who we are as a community, in addition to speaking about war and racism and injustice. We are not outside. I think it's important that human rights and resistance to oppression be included in the way we define ourselves as a community." Connections to emerging peace groups happened for Rachel after 9/11. She became an ardent advocate of the war with Iraq, but her study about why all this had happened led her to the issue of Israel-Palestine. And she wrote, "Why do I want to go? I've been organizing in Olympia for a little over a year on anti-war global justice issues. And at some point, it started to feel like this work is missing a solid connection to the people who are most immediately impacted by U.S. foreign policy. I feel pretty isolated from the world in some ways because of living in Olympia my whole life. So I've had this underlying need to go to a place and meet people who are on the other end of my tax money that goes to fund the U.S. and other militaries." She was very concerned about the consequences for Palestinians if, in fact, the United States went to war with Iraq. And in 2002, during the second intifada, after it had started in Israel and Palestine in 2000, there was a lot of concern everywhere about what would happen to Palestinians as things escalated in the Middle East. There was a resolution because of the violence occurring at the start of the second intifada. There was a resolution in the United Nations to bring a human rights monitoring force to the region. It was vetoed by the United States, supported by Israel, encouraged by Israel, and as a result, the International Solidarity Movement was formed. The movement has only 2 stipulations for participation. One must believe in freedom and equality for the Palestinian people and commit to using only nonviolent direct action methods of resistance. And the internationals were called to be a part of this. They came to stand in solidarity with Palestinians who were choosing to resist in nonviolent ways. Friends of Rachel's did this in 2002. They talked to her about where the needs were. She began to study the whole issue very intensely. She was also studying Arabic, was very strong in language, and as it was a result of that she made the decision that she was going to go and be a part of this movement, and she chose very specifically to go to Gaza, where she thought the greatest need was. So nearly 11 years ago, in January 2003, Rachel flew to Israel, to Ben Gurion Airport, and then quickly went to the West Bank village of Beit Sahur for training with ISM. And from there she traveled to Gaza to begin her work. Just taking a look at the map here, you'll see Israel, what is now considered Israel, in the dark green. It's equal to about the size of Maryland. Craig and I, as I've said, have spent a lot of time there. We were up north for a good portion of that time in Haifa. And just to give you a sense about the size of the area, for those of you that haven't been there, the driving distance between Haifa and Tel Aviv is about an hour. So that gives you some sense about how really small that space is. The light green areas on the map are territories where Palestinians live under Israeli military occupation in the West Bank, where Ramallah is, Bethlehem, and there's Jerusalem. And then the Gaza Strip, which is under siege, continues to be under siege. In the West Bank, there are over 2.5 million people living. 2 million of those are Palestinian. This, of course, under international law is land designated for the Palestinian people. But there are 500,000 settlers in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, which is also occupied by the Israelis. Gaza, down in the southern part, is bordered by Egypt to the south, by Israel, and by the Mediterranean Sea. There are between 1.7 and 1.8 million Palestinians living there now. It is a very small place. If you think about how small Israel is and then look at Gaza in context, it's a very small place, 4 to 8 miles wide in different areas and 25 miles long. It has about 1/5 of the land area of Allen County, just to give you some perspective. 1/5 of the land area of Allen County, but it has nearly 5 times the population that you do. Over, as I said, nearing 1.8 million people. Nearly 65% of the people there are under 25 years of age. 65% nearly under 25 years of age. And I sometimes say that the issue, I don't think, is even so much the population density, though it is very dense, but it's that people there virtually are unable to move anywhere else. It's such a struggle. We could go into long stories about the struggles that Palestinians have getting in and out. There's 40 kilometers of gorgeous Mediterranean coastline, but it's under severe blockade by the Israeli Navy and has been for many years. Israel also maintains a buffer zone along the border areas that takes Palestinian land from farmers and also provides a terrible threat to the farmers and their families who go out to try and farm this area. 3/4 of the population of Gaza are refugees who live in overcrowded refugee camps with very limited access to clean water and to electricity. And I would just add that the electricity problem right now is as critical as it's been in a very long time because of fuel not getting in now from Egypt. The unemployment rate in Gaza was 31% at the beginning of 2013, but it's 39% for the younger group of people, for youth. And keep in mind the large proportion of the population that fall into that category. So you have a large population, a highly educated population, high literacy, but with enormous unemployment, low wages, and lack of mobility. And that is a formula for some very difficult things. When Rachel was there, Gaza was occupied from within. There were 8,000 settlers living inside the Gaza Strip on 21 Gaza settlements in the area. A lot of them were in the south, where Rachel was, near Rafah. It took 25,000 soldiers to keep those 8,000 settlers there. And according to the figures that I've read, the settlements took 40% of the land. There were, at the time, and I was there during that period, internal checkpoints all along the borders that were manned by Israeli soldiers. There were sniper towers, Rachel wrote, of trying to provide some protection to workers who were repairing wells while they would be fired upon from the towers. There were constant military incursions into neighborhoods, and there were internal checkpoints that kept people from going to school, to see their families, even within this small area. In 2005, the situation changed because those 21 Gaza settlements were dismantled, which was a good thing in terms of international law. There was a lot of attention to it, which, of course, it was very difficult for those folks to lose their homes. But they were compensated with several $100,000 worth of money. They were relocated, many in the West Bank and West Bank settlements. And I think one of the problems that I saw with that is that thousands of Palestinians in Gaza had lost their homes in demolitions, and yet few people understood or knew about that situation. So Rafah is where Rachel was at the southern tip of the Gaza Strip. I'm going to right now let you look at a short video of Rachel. It's her last press conference, taken 2 days before she was killed. She was on top of a rooftop of a home that was threatened with demolition, and flat rooftop with other internationals. The first person that you see is one of her colleagues, Alice, who is self-identified as being Jewish, and she has cousins in Israel, yet Alice opposed the occupation, and like many in the international solidarity movement, young Jewish people and older Jewish people came to join other internationals in solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. So please take a minute to look at this video.
We are international human rights observers from the United Kingdom, from England, from Scotland, from Italy, and from the United States of America.
Who should I talk at, you or you? My name is Rachel Corrie. I'm from the United States. I'm from Olympia, Washington. That's an enormous question. I've been here for about a month and a half now, and this is definitely the most difficult situation that I've ever seen. In the time that I've been here, children have been shot and killed. On the 30th of January, the Israeli military bulldozed the 2 largest water wells, destroying over half of Rafah's water supply. Every few days, if not every day, houses are demolished here. People are economically devastated because of the closure of the borders into Egypt and the extreme control of the Gazan economy by Israel. I came to look at the aftermath of a place where 25 greenhouses had been demolished on the other side of Rafah, destroying the livelihoods of about 300 people. And that had taken place while they rounded up about 150 men, held them under a sniper tower, and shot around them to contain the men, the farmers in the area. So I feel like what I'm witnessing here is a very systematic destruction of people's ability to survive. And that is incredibly horrifying. It's incredibly horrifying. The current Israeli government, I don't have a great deal of faith that they're going to listen to any message from me. I think it has become clear that this government does not care about the safety of its own people and doesn't care at all about the lives of Palestinian people. I think it's ridiculous that my government supports this government and referred to Ariel Sharon as a man of peace. It's clear to me, being here, that Ariel Sharon is invested in perpetuating perpetuating violence. I think calling it a cycle of violence disregards the imbalance of power in this situation, that people's lives here are almost completely controlled by the Israeli government. And it's amazing that people are able to hold on to their humanity as much as they have. Sometimes it takes a while for it to set in what is happening here, because I think many of the people here, they try to maintain what they can of their lives, and I don't know, maybe it has to do with protecting their children, that they try to be happy, joke with their children. So sometimes it takes time to it's hard to hold in your mind, you know, the complete reality of what's happening here. Sometimes I'm sitting down to dinner with people and I just realize that that there is a massive military machine surrounding them and trying to kill these people that I'm having dinner with, these families that I'm sitting down to eat with, and who are being very generous and kind to me, and their children here who are incredibly threatened, living lives that no child ever should have to live. And so I feel a lot of horror, really. I feel a lot of horror about the situation.
I often ask people to share what they've seen in that video, and for the sake of time, I won't, but I hope that you looked around at what was behind Rachel. That was a neighborhood at one time, full of homes. All the homes in that entire area along the border with Egypt were destroyed. There was a steel wall. Did you see the wall in the background? It's not the wall that you hear of most often, not the wall in the West Bank, but there was a steel wall that we sometimes say Rachel was killed for, and that we actually paid for. It was not on the border with Israel. It was between Gaza and Egypt and on Palestinian land. You saw the big equipment, the Caterpillar bulldozers, paid for with our tax dollars, exported by Caterpillar, incorporated and armored for the purposes of demolition. Rachel lived in Rafah with families. She built relationships with them, and particularly stayed with families along the Gaza-Egypt border whose homes were at risk of demolition. One was the Nasrallah family, and it was their home where she was killed. The older brother and his children are pictured there with her. There was a second story where the younger brother, Khaled, and his 2 preschool kids and wife lived. She wrote to me, Rachel, about them. She said, after I wrote to you, I went incommunicado from the affinity group for about 10 hours, which I spent with a family on the front line in High Salam, who fixed me dinner and have cable TV. The 2 front rooms of their house are unusable because gunshots have been fired through the walls. So the whole family, 3 kids and 2 parents, sleep in the parents' bedroom. I sleep on the floor next to the youngest daughter, Iman, and we all share blankets. And there's little Iman in the photo. Rachel worked with ISM activists, Palestinians and internationals from Sweden, Italy, Japan, the UK. They slept at water wells to protect them from demolition. They worked with children's and women's groups and human rights organizations in Gaza. And Rachel planned for connections with her counterparts in Olympia, and she dreamed of an Olympia Rafah Sister City project. She wrote at the Internet Cafe to our family and friends and to her friends to get the story out. She said, I couldn't even believe that a place like this existed, but even more, can you believe there are children here? Forget the fear. They tell me that at night. Forget the fear. I am ashamed that I am scared for my own body and dying anonymously inside a house in one of the most populous places on earth, where children die as martyrs of the occupation, which we pay for quietly without ever knowing their names. We need more people. I love all of you. Rachel. With other activists, Rachel engaged in nonviolent direct action to support families whose homes were threatened with demolition. and there were massive demolitions happening at this time. Human Rights Watch reported that between September 2000 to September 2004, the Israeli military destroyed more than 10% of the homes of the people in Rafah. 16,000 people lost their homes. Many of these people were dispossessed, again, for a second or third time. And Human Rights Watch said that the pattern of destruction strongly suggests that Israeli forces demolished homes wholesale, regardless of whether they posed a specific threat in violation of international law. In most of the cases, Human Rights Watch found that the destruction was carried out in the absence of military necessity. On March 16, 2003, Rachel and 7 other activists from the US and UK were called to the High Salam area when 2 US-funded Caterpillar D9R bulldozers are being run by the Israeli military personnel, and also an armored personnel carrier came to the area and were pushing on structures and clearing land and threatening homes. There were 2 IDF soldiers in each bulldozer, a driver and a commander, who was to be a second set of eyes. And there was a company commander in the APC vehicle who, during the course of the activity, when the activists would stand in front of the houses, had requested that the operation cease. But the commanders, higher in command, ordered the work to continue and not to let the activists interfere with their work. The members of the family who owned the home that you saw in the photo were watching through a crack in their garden wall as the bulldozer approached. On one run, at the end of the day, after the activists felt that they had been successful, the bulldozers had gone back out to the border area, but then one came back and came toward the Nasrallah house, made a run toward the Nasrallah house. Richard Purcell, one of the eyewitnesses, testified and swore in his affidavit in Israeli court to this testimony. The bulldozer turned to face towards Dr. Samir's house. As it moved forward, Rachel knelt briefly in its path while the bulldozer was 20 to 30 meters away from her. The bulldozer was moving very slowly. As it advanced, its blade was placed in the ground and earth piled up in front of it. As the bulldozer reached the place where Rachel was standing, she began, as many of us did on the day, to climb the pile of earth. She reached the top, and at this point she must have been clearly visible to the driver, especially as she was still wearing the high visibility jacket. She turned and faced in my direction and began to come back down the pile. The bulldozer continued to move forward at the same speed. As her feet hit the ground, I saw a panicked expression on her face and began to move forward, shouting and gesturing to the driver to stop. Something happened at this point to push Rachel forward onto her face. The pile of earth engulfed her and she was hidden from my view. The bulldozer moved forward until its main section was totally over the place where Rachel had been standing. It paused and then backed over her and continued reversing until it was about 20 meters away. And Rachel was held by her activist friends who told her that they loved her. Her last words were, I think that my back is broken, and she died shortly after. The world has responded to Rachel in so many different ways. In Rafah, they said she was the woman who came to stop the tanks. In Athens, Greece, they refer to her as she who would not retreat. And in our hometown, they call Rachel Peacemaker. Our earliest emails in March of 2003 included ads from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, placed by Israeli Jews who understood why Rachel had gone to Gaza and why she stood before the bulldozer that day. And there were letters that we received. A woman in New York wrote, "My grandparents fled the pogroms of Russia 100 years ago and spent decades working for the creation of a Jewish homeland. I'm certain that if they were alive, they would weep for all that is happening there now, as I do." And a professor in Egypt wrote to Rachel, wherever she may be. You know that for me, America is connected with Israeli massacres of my people. You must know how difficult it is for me to be objective, how difficult it was to admit that thanks to you, I have come to know that there is a conscience in America. I say that thanks to you, there is a conscience on that other side, young and not just alert, but alerting in its capacity for sacrifice, prepared to die for another people in a simple jacket and a pair of blue jeans. Rachel wrote, I think freedom for Palestine could be an incredible source of hope to people struggling all over the world. She has taught her dad and I, and many of us, that what each one of us does makes a great difference. And she's left us with a great deal of work to do. Thank you very much.
I should go on after her. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of our family's experience, and I'm going to focus mostly, at least in the first of this. I'll try not to go on too long because the evening's getting late. But our search for answers about what happened to Rachel and for accountability in that. I'm going to pace a little bit, unlike Cindy, so if you want something to think about, you can wonder whether I'm going to drop off these steps. But we tried to get accountability first through Israeli military justice, if they were going to do an investigation, then through diplomacy, so getting our State Department to work with the Israeli government. Then we tried for a U.S. investigation, and then finally a civil lawsuit in the Israeli courts. So how did that work out for us? In terms of Israeli military justice, the day after Rachel was killed, President Bush had a telephone conversation with Prime Minister Sharon, and Prime Minister Sharon promised Bush a thorough, credible, and transparent investigation into Rachel's killing, and with a report to be given to the U.S. government. But by May 23rd of that same year, so just a couple of months after Rachel was killed, we got word that the Israeli military had closed their investigation, found no fault with either the bulldozer driver or the person next to it, his commander, or anybody who was associated with the Israeli military, and they declined to give their findings to the U.S. government. Now, later on in that year, the brief that they had was made available so that we could read it and so people at the U.S. Embassy could read it, but was never actually given to us. So you can't hold up something and say this is public information. The conclusions were made public several months later. So they closed the investigation in May 23rd of 2003, and then on June 11th in 2004, and really in reply to a letter that I had written to the State Department and kind of complaining about one of their replies, we got a letter back from Lawrence B. Wilkerson. He was the Chief of Staff to Colin Powell in the State Department. He's also his Chief of Staff for about 10 years before that. But anyway, Larry Wilkerson wrote to us and he said, in response to my letter, he said, your ultimate question, however, is a valid one. Do we consider the report we received to indicate an investigation that was thorough, credible, and transparent? I can answer you without equivocation, no, we do not consider it so. And that's remaining the position of the U.S. government, reiterated later under the second Bush administration when Colin Powell is no longer there. It's been stated to us by high levels of the Obama White House. And most recently, last year, by the U.S. ambassador to Israel while we were in Tel Aviv. So that's their opinion of what the Israeli military did, that there was never a thorough, credible, and transparent investigation. So we were working with diplomacy to put more pressure on, and we have continued for 10 years to try to put more pressure on the Israeli government. And I want to just share some of the results of that. In May 2008, Ambassador James D. Cunningham was, or Ambassador Designate, I ought to say, was getting his confirmation hearing in the Senate, and in front of actually exchange with the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who is now Vice President of the United States, he said that, in answer to a question, that the U.S. had, quote, repeatedly engaged the government of Israel at the highest levels about this issue, that is, Rachel. Cunningham noted that President Bush, Secretary Colin Powell, Ambassador Daniel Kurtzer, Deputy Chief of Mission Richard LeBaron, Assistant Secretary William Burns, Deputy Assistant Secretary David Satterfield, among others, had, quote, raised this issue with their counterparts and other appropriate authorities in the Israeli government. But we received, actually a little before that, a letter from Michelle Dernier-Toth, who is the Managing Director of the Office of Overseas Services at Department of State, and she said, we have constantly requested that the government of Israel conduct a full and transparent investigation into Rachel's death. Our requests have gone unanswered or ignored. So that's pretty much where our diplomacy has gotten us. We continue to work on that, and essentially what happened after that is, well, I'll go back to this and I'll kind of continue that maybe if I remember that thought later. Because then we were also asking for a U.S.-led investigation. So shortly after Rachel's killing, our congressman, her congressman really at that time, and then later our congressman when we moved back to Olympia, Brian Baird, entered into the House HCR 111, a resolution that called for an independent U.S.-led investigation of Rachel's death. It also expressed condolences to our family and asked that the U.S. and Israel work together to see that nothing like that happen again. I think Congressman Breyer thought we would get maybe 25, 30 signatures, sign-on signatures to this resolution. He had hoped that it would be a concurrent resolution, that it would also be entered into the Senate, but the Washington senators never would do that. They just simply didn't get it done, although we asked repeatedly. But anyway, we ended up with 78 co-sponsors for that bill, including Congressman Baird, which was really good. And the reason for that is a whole lot of communities like yours would lobby on behalf of getting that passed. Now, when you go and talk about what one person kind of coldly called the cause of Rachel, and so you're talking about a U.S. person killed by one of our greatest allies in Israel, that was an easier thing to talk about than what the same person called Rachel's cause, or the Palestinian people. But it got people in the door. It was a wonderful way to go and lobby about this, and we're really thankful to the people that did that, and we appreciate that. Now, also trying to get a U.S. investigation, we thought we needed to not only talk to the State Department about that, but we were told that only the Justice Department can do an investigation. So we tried to get into the Justice Department, and we really couldn't get in there. Finally, a staffer on the Hill told us, we'll go talk to a U.S. attorney in Western Washington. We did that in March of that was in February of 2005. And we were told when we went into that meeting, he said, I've got all the time you need. You can have all day if you want to talk to you, but I'm here to tell you there will never be an investigation into your daughter's killing. He said it is not illegal to kill an American citizen under U.S. law in another country. And it makes a little bit of sense that U.S. law should not work in another country as theirs should here. The reciprocity of that. I think you just kind of understand that. But there is one place in the U.S. Code where you can, where the U.S. does try to exert its influence overseas for that. And so if the Attorney General or his designate would find that Rachel's killing was part of an attempt to coerce, retaliate, or intimidate a foreign population or foreign government, then it would be against U.S. law. That's the U.S. anti-terrorism law. And we thought, you know, we could make a case for that. But until you investigate, how do you know? And this person kept saying, and his associate kept saying, no, you can't even investigate unless you get that signature. And he said that no Attorney General, past, present, or future, will ever sign that in the case of Israel. Which sounds astounding, but I actually think he was being friendly. I think he was just trying to tell us the way the world is. So it took us a long time. We actually, our daughter Sarah said, wait a minute, you can't prosecute. You could investigate anytime you want to. And she pressed that fairly hard. We got a call back from his office the next day saying they misspoke. And in fact, you could do an investigation without having to have that signed, and then the signature would come if you wanted to actually do a prosecution. So then we were trying to get into the Justice Department in Washington, D.C., and finally, in a conversation with our daughter Sarah, who was really the go-between here, we heard from the U.S. Attorney in Western Washington that he'd just gotten an email from the people back in D.C., and they said, continue not to give my name or telephone number to the Corries, and we still can't meet with them. And this guy at Washington State was so mad, he just sent us the email. And so we were back in D.C. About a week later and mentioned this to a few members of Congress. And so we finally, on March 17th, so 2 years and 1 day after Rachel was killed, we finally got into the Justice Department to talk about getting an independent U.S.-led investigation into Rachel's killing. Then, about a year later, we had our final meeting in the Justice Department when Barry Sabin, who is a presidential appointee, told us that they had looked at what they thought they understand the situation, and they had made the decision that they would do no investigation. And our daughter Sarah asked a couple of questions. You know, was part of this a policy decision? And he said yes. Part of it was made on policy. So not a legal decision, but a policy decision. And then Sarah asked, did this go to the Attorney General? And I kind of like Barry Sabin, because she always knew where he stood. But he kind of smiled and he said, I knew you were going to ask that question, and I'm not going to answer it. So much for a U.S. investigation. That left us with a civil lawsuit, because the only sort of process that we have as a family is to pursue, you know, get an attorney and pursue this in court. And I keep mentioning when we're in Washington, D.C., when you're talking to members of Congress, the State Department, or the White House, that we don't think that it should be up to a family, or as I put it, a father doesn't have the ability to enforce a promise that was given from one head of state to another. I still don't think that our entering into a civil lawsuit excuses the United States from enforcing the promise that Prime Minister Sharon gave to President Bush. But it's the only process that we can control and send forward. So we chose to sue in Israel, and partly because what we wanted was information. And so how do you compel somebody to bring information into a U.S. court when it's over in Israel, or get their witnesses? Because we don't know how Rachel was killed. We weren't there. We hadn't seen it. So we wanted to do this in Israel, and we didn't hire. We came to an agreement with an attorney, Hussein Abu Hussein. He's Palestinian, but lives inside 48, so he's an Israeli citizen and practices law mostly out of Haifa, but also down in Jerusalem in the High Court. And Hussein agreed to be our attorney, really on a contingency basis, which I thought at the time would be pro bono, because we weren't going to win this lawsuit. But anyway, we went forward with that. So the lawsuit was filed on March 15th, it's March 15th in 2005 that was filed. That's a misprint. So 2 years, less 1 day from when Rachel was killed, and 2 years is the statute of limitations. So we waited right until the end to see if negotiations or something would come through on this. The first trial day then was March 10th, 2010 in Haifa District Court. The last trial day was July 10th of 2011. Now see, in Israel, unlike here, you don't have a jury. So we had one judge. You could have 2 or 3 judges, I think, in district court in certain cases, but we only had one judge. And he has a lot of other things to do, it's true, but he doesn't have, since he doesn't have to negotiate a jury, he doesn't have to get the thing done. So actually the first month in March of 2010, we had quite a few dates actually during then, but after that it'd be every 3-5 weeks or something like that. At a space where it was kind of a toss-up, was whether you fly home or you stay in Haifa. Mostly we stayed in Haifa to work on the case. And so we lived in Haifa for about 9 months, I suppose all total. Our daughter Sarah was there with us, was there for about a year. And there's some good things about that. But we have, in all that time, we had about 15 days of testimony. We brought, well, there were 23 witnesses in all, so we had three eyewitnesses on our side. I'm trying to, or 4, Cindy, thank you. This is not all-timers, it's only part-timers. We only have part-time. I forget this stuff. But anyhow, we have 4 of our own eyewitnesses there, friends of Rachel's, which was very comforting. But 23 in all, and over 2,000 pages of testimony, which of course are all in Hebrew. So we had to get a translator. Also, we couldn't understand what was going on, so we had translators sitting next to us in the courtroom who would simultaneously translate for us. And most of these people that translated for us were young Jewish Israeli refusants that refused to go to war, to join the military in the occupation. So we got to know a lot of young people during this time, and it was really quite helpful. We got the verdict on August 28, 2012. And whoops, I went too far, I hit it twice. That's Sarah is the one that you don't recognize, they're the 3 of us, and then we're flanked with white shirts are our attorneys. So Hussein Al-Hussein from Olympia, which is, for those of you who've been in Israel, Palestine, is about a little bit southwest of Nazareth. And this is, I'm blanking, help me. Jamil Dakwar. And he's actually from Haifa, but now lives in New York City, and he was helping us on his vacation or days off, or I don't know how he excused it, but anyway, it wasn't part of his job, but he was just helping us. So what we had in the court case, what we alleged was that Israel injured Rachel's right to life and her human rights anchored in international human law, in international human rights law, and basic law in Israel, her human dignity and liberty. And we allege that the killing was either intentional or due to gross negligence. The verdict? Well, let me tell you a little bit about this. When we were in the courtroom, the Israeli soldiers that were on the ground and the Israeli military, or the Israeli government, brought them to the trial. See, we weren't just suing a bulldozer driver. We were suing the Israeli military and the Israeli army because, well, 2 things. It doesn't do me any good. Even if you get hurt, the bulldozer driver, it doesn't really do me any good or our family. In a lawsuit, if you're looking for information, we got to go up higher than that. And also, so you want to bring people that have more information than the guy driving a bulldozer into the courtroom. And the other part of it is that, and it became clear in the lawsuit that this is systemic, that what's going on there is just part of what the IDF does, and so we wanted to put the IDF on trial. And one of the problems we had is that I'm trying to get the words straight here, but it was an unusual security certificate was signed by Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak that said that the key witnesses, the underground soldiers that were there when Rachel was killed, could not be revealed to our family and couldn't be in open court. Now, one of them, a captain that was in the APC, had already testified on television, so he was in open court, but the rest of them testified behind the screen. And so we didn't get to see him. Our attorneys did get to see him, but even when they asked if just the family could see these people, they were told that it was too dangerous to let Cindy and I and Sarah see the people that were in the bulldozer that killed their daughter. A couple of, well, I'll just jump here to what what the findings of it. So the court came out and said that Rachel was killed as an act of war. And they said that the state cannot be held responsible for any acts in wartime. So that flies in the face of international law. It flies in the face of what I learned before I became a soldier in Vietnam, but that's what the judge found. He found that Rachel was in a closed military zone and was responsible for her own death. Now, in terms of the closed military zone, our attorney kept asking for any piece of paper from the Israeli military that declared it a closed military zone. And they couldn't find one. And indeed, the captain of the armored personnel carrier that was on the ground, the highest ranking soldier that was actually out in the field that day, he said he did not believe it was a closed military zone, and he didn't have the authority to make one. So if the captain in charge of their detail that day doesn't know what is a closed military zone, I don't know how Rachel would. But, you know, what difference does it make? You don't have the right to crush somebody with a bulldozer because it's declared a closed military zone. I'm running late, so I'm not going to go too much more into it, but if you want to read really a good article on the trial, you can go here to truthout.org and Richard Silverstein's article in there. There was reaction to this. Former President Jimmy Carter came out, and if I find it here, I will read to you what the Carter Center said. The killing of an American peace activist is unacceptable. The court's decision confirms a climate of impunity which facilitates human rights violations against Palestinian civilians in the occupied territory. So that was Jimmy Carter. Richard Falk, who was a UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory, said this is a sad outcome for the rule of law and the hope that an Israeli court would place limits on the violence of the state, particularly in relation to innocent and unarmed civilians in an occupied territory. I think they were both right to generalize this because we didn't bring this lawsuit really about Rachel. Yes, we wanted to know what happened to Rachel. We wanted some accountability for it. But we also brought it because almost nobody in the West Bank can do this, and extremely unlikely, extremely hard that anybody in Gaza can get themselves to an Israeli court and have a fair hearing there. So we wanted to do that. Our attorney announced that we were going to appeal this as he left the courtroom before he had time to talk to his clients, but we concur with him, and we do have a court date of May 21st of next year for that. I want to talk about a couple of other things, and I am running a little bit late, but I want to go through this, and because I want to introduce you. This is the younger brother that lived upstairs in the house when Cindy was talking about it, and it's his wife, so that Khaled, Samat, and Sema, who was born after Rachel was killed. And this picture was taken in 2005 in LAX. So this family, whose home by that time was destroyed, is in the United States, and they traveled with us around the United States. And they're dear, as you can see, they're a dear, sweet family. Well, to get to the United States, think about it, the thing you have to have is a visa. To get a visa, at this time, this family had to go to Tel Aviv to get a visa, and they were given a task for one day to go walk freely on the streets of Tel Aviv and go to the U.S. Embassy and get their visa. And then they were given a U.S. visa. Now, for a 34-year-old male, Palestinian from Gaza, to get a visa to come to the United States, they actually check them out pretty well here in the United States before they're allowed to do that. But he checked out. So what I'm saying is neither Israel nor the United States had anything against the family that lived in the house that Rachel was protected protecting and was subsequently destroyed. They came to the United States, and they came from this house. And I just wanted to draw your attention to it. As you look at the house, if you look up closely, maybe here, you can see it's got a lot of freckles in it. Well, those aren't just freckles. Those are bullet holes that I think Cindy read about and from Rachel. But when you look down here to the older brother's part of the house, those rooms down there were the children's bedrooms. And at about 6 o'clock at night, or after, sometime after, the Israeli military would often drive past and they would shoot into the house. Now, I think they're using like an M60. Like I say, I'm a Vietnam vet. You could mount on a tank, you could mount a 50 caliber machine gun, and that would go through this house and 3 or 4 others. But what was happening is it'd go through the concrete wall that's on the outside, it'd go through the children's bedroom, through the concrete wall that was between the children's bedroom and the living room, but the third concrete wall would stop the bullets. So they slept in the family's back bedroom, as Rachel said, in a bundle of blankets. So I want you to think about being under the stress of living in this house. Now, it's not like your neighbors, they don't have neighbors anymore. There used to be neighbors, even out between them and the border of Egypt. But those houses have all been destroyed, in fact, so much that they were dug under and underneath into the sand. There's just a little rubble left out there. And also beside them, they don't really have neighbors. Kids can't have anything over to play. You can't let the kids go out except to school. And when somebody leaves, you're not sure whether they get back. And they would never leave the house completely empty, because then Israel would say it was abandoned, even if they just went to get groceries, and it could be destroyed then. So there's somebody in that house that can't get in and out, and they're under all this pressure. They're trying to lose what they're, anyway, they're under a lot of pressure. So Colin, which you saw in the picture a couple frames back, he tried to figure out what to do. What do you do when your family is under that sort of siege and oppression? And what he said is the answer was rabbits. They got a book on raising rabbits, they built a couple of hutches, got 3 rabbits, and by the time we got there, they had 30 rabbits. Yeah, because that's what rabbits do. But little Ina is about 6 years old in this picture. She's petting a rabbit, and it was explained long after Cindy took this picture, but while we were touring with Colin, that what it was is that they felt like the kids and the adults needed something soft that they could take care of, something that they could love. And so what I'm telling you, that what I learned from college, is that when somebody takes absolutely everything else you have, they threaten your house, they take your house, they threaten your children, your family, your very life, what's the most important thing you can do? The most important thing you can do is keep the capacity to love. And he was intentionally doing this for his children. I'm going to take, that was actually a very good ending, but Cindy wants me to do this one tonight. Maybe not. It'll only take a minute. So anyway, here's Abba Jamil. You didn't meet Abba Jamil when Rachel was on top of the rooftop, but that was his house that he was on top of. So here's Abba Jamil and his family out in the dark. Now, the house that you saw Rachel talking on was destroyed shortly after we visited in the fall of 2003. So Rachel was killed in the spring. About 6 months later, we visited and we actually met Abba Jamil in his house. He is a chef, very good cook. We had great dinner at his house. But then that house that he had was destroyed. It was torn down by the Israeli military. So he was relatively wealthy, and he had a garden spot out east of town, and it had a tool shed or something. So he improved the tool shed and took his family to live there. And we came out to meet him one evening late, and the next morning we came back and we saw what happened. Now this was in 2009 when we were there, so it was after what the Israelis called Cast Lev, the attack that happened in, well, if you read the newspapers, it happened in December and January. So December 2008, January 2009. But in February 2009, while Abba Jamil was away, a rocket landed in his backyard and killed most of his livestock that was out there. And his wife grabs the children, starts running out the door across the street, and remembers she's forgotten Jamil. the little boy. So she runs back in the house, grabs little Jamil, is running out again, and the rocket hits the house and does that to the house. So he's had 2 homes destroyed. Of course, it isn't like insurance is going to rebuild this stuff. He's had 2 homes destroyed, and that's why we're outside in the dark. It's because that's all they have. But he's pointing, he had this tree here. I don't know if you can see this stump. The tree, it was an olive tree that grew outside his first home that we saw him at in 2003. And when that home was destroyed, he dug up this tree and he transplanted it to his new house over here near the garden. And then when the rockets hit, it just sheared off the tree, like it says. And what he's pointing out to us here, if we can look at it a little better, is that tree has still got life in it. Well, the Palestinians talk about something called samud, the idea of never giving up, no matter what happens to you. And I think we've got a little bit of the samud in our family now, learning it from the Palestinians. But this tree shows you what samud is about. So I'll leave you there. Thank you.
We have some time for some questions. I'm going to ask that the questions be short, to the point, and with all gentleness to our guests, I'm going to ask that the answers try to be short, to the point, so that we have as many questions as possible, okay? All right. And I'll have Reverend Fred Haskey take the microphone around.
Raise your hand. Way in the back. Good.
Mr. and Mrs. Corrie, good evening. As a Palestinian American, I'm extremely humbled by the sacrifice that Rachel has made by what you continue to do, and I'm thankful for it. Mine is more or less a rhetorical question, one that I asked in our conversation yesterday, but I'd like to bring up again today. It's more of a commentary on the situation. As you said, samud is genetically encoded in every Palestinian, and no matter how much gets destroyed, we will always rebuild. I'm not concerned or worried about that necessarily. What concerns me is, as an American citizen, is this idea that keeps getting propagated that Israel is the most democratic country in the Middle East. And your story and the struggle within the court system highlights the essence of the falsehood of that statement. And the Attorney General, and what he said about no Attorney General, past, present, or future, will sign that letter, is more of a statement that we should really think about and consider as American citizens that value our democracy and sometimes step into other countries to bring that democracy to them, is that why do we look the other way when it's certain people doing certain things to even our own people? So I leave you with that, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I would only say that the gentleman, the U.S. attorney that told us that, is now working and volunteering in Ramallah. So you never know where life's going to take anybody. And I don't know why he's there. I mean, I don't know how he got there.
And I would just reinforce that we need to recognize that there is inequality within Israel, not even looking at the occupied territories. But Adallah, which is a human rights organization that looks at the treatment of Arab citizens, identifies over 50 discriminatory laws. I think I said that before. And they are challenging those all the time. I would urge you to look at Israeli human rights organizations like B'Tselem, like Gisha, that talk about all the ways in which the rights of people within Israel and in the occupied territories are being violated by the Israeli government. And people there are trying to change that. Thank goodness for those organizations. And yes, there are some people in our government that challenge those things going on. We certainly talked with people in the State Department and the embassy that are very aware of them. It just seems like it's a very, very, very slow process, but we should keep our eyes on all of that. Thank you.
Why is Rachel was killed? She's just doing her job, and I don't know why the bulldozer ran her over like that. Do you know why she was killed?
Well, I think you know that's what we wanted to find out about. Many people have said Rachel was murdered. For a very long time, I mean, Craig and I refused to use that word because we were seeking truth and accountability and wanted to work through all these processes. I've listened to the testimony now, and Craig didn't have a chance to mention that the driver and the commander in the bulldozer testified. Their testimony conflicted in very significant ways. And after listening to that, I'm convinced that one of the people in the bulldozer, saw Rachel, knew she was there. And it took a long time for me to get to a point where I would say that with confidence, but that's what I believe. But even more, I had a chance to listen to the deputy battalion commander and to a colonel, Pinhas Swaritz, who was in charge of the southern Gaza Strip and is now working for the Friends of the IDF in New York City. And I gained some understanding about the mentality of the military. I think one thing Craig didn't mention is that the person who wrote the manual for how those bulldozers were to be written, there's testimony in our trial under oath from this person who was high-ranking that he believed there were no civilians in war. So we hear that over and over again. And the person who conducted was the lead investigator in Rachel's case, this investigation that was supposed to be thorough, credible, and transparent. He testified that it was his belief that they were at war with everybody in Gaza, including the peace activists. So how, do you go into an investigative process with that kind of approach? So I think there's a very flawed system operating right now for a lot of reasons, and that's why we continue to challenge it.
Quick question. What's wrong with our Congress that can be intimidated? I use that word accurately, not loosely. That it can be intimidated by AIPAC. That's my question.
Not all can. Our Congressman Brian Baird, like I say, he put HDR 111 out early, but while he was doing that, he was really just supporting our family. He would start, as Cindy would say, almost every sentence about this, I'm a supporter of Israel, but, and then go through that. He eventually, sort of on his own initiative, we didn't know he was going to do this, but in February of 2009, so just after Castled, he went to Gaza. And he saw it. He was only there for a day, but he went into Gaza. And when he came out that evening, what he wrote on his official U.S. Congress blog looked like Rachel wrote it. It was an about change, and he went back 4 more times, I believe, 3 or 4 more times, trying to take members, and did take members of Congress back to see what he had seen. It's very few. Now, what he told us at a similar group, is a group that you people, if you're not in contact with them, ought to be coordinating with the U.S. campaign to end the Israeli occupation. And Brian came to one of their meetings a few years back, and somebody asked him sort of the same question. He said, look, if you come out on this issue like I did, you will lose about $200,000 in campaign contribution. And what's more, it will probably go to your opponent. So as soon as you step out, you just dug a $400,000 hole for yourself for campaign contribution. And he looked around the room and he says, and you guys ain't making it up. And so a lot of it, and in his opinion, it comes to money in terms, because it's not necessarily votes, but money in terms of campaign contributions. Now, I will say this about AIPAC. And that's just one of the groups that you're lobbying at. The Christian right has a huge, in terms of number, lobbying group. And of course, military industrial complex want to sell the goods to Israel. So you've got at least those three obvious groups going. But AIPAC is really very effective at what they do, and they take a very long-term view at it. So they find an up-and-coming young politician, and they get to know him, maybe while they're running for city council even, and they talk to these people, and if the person becomes a senator one day, then they're old friends. They've been friends for 20 years. And so it becomes sort of a natural thing to also go to these people and try to get information or their opinion on it. So they're a very effective group with their money and just the dedication and the number of volunteers they have working for them.
It's very important for all of us that would like to see different policies to speak out, and even though we're frustrated with the positions that the Congress have taken, to be very present in that environment. Yeah.
If I can take, I know we have a hard time going short on these things, but sitting, I think, is really important to lobby. You remember, and I think a lot of times if you're not used to doing that, you go and you want them to change a vote on this, that, or the other thing, and if they do, that's wonderful. You know, if they start voting with you, that's cool. But I think our experience is you have to keep going back and back, because at first, particularly if they don't understand this issue at all, they're going to think you're nuts. And so you've got to sort of just, I think like what I learned in business is your first meeting, you're just trying to get another meeting. So what you want to do is become eventually a resource for your member of Congress with this, when you have this view about this situation. And so we have done that with a lot of people that have worked longer on this issue than we have. And I know during CASLET, for instance, we were in our members of Congress's office in the state, and we had friends who got on their cell phone and called their sister, I think it was, sister-in-law in Gaza while the bombs were falling, and the staffers of those members of Congress listened to somebody on the ground in Gaza while this was going on. And we've kept it up since then. And actually, when one of those people, their foreign policy advisor, left, a congressman, he's not even our congressman, her replacement called me last August and said, I've been told to contact you for information about Israel-Palestine. So we went in and just had another conversational, get acquainted sort of thing. So that's what I think we need to be doing.
Build the relationships and know that meetings with your local, your representatives' local staffers are just as important as meetings back in Washington, D.C. Both things are important, but build those relationships.
My question is also following that. Is there a short list of congressmen who are at least listening to a reasonable approach?
Yeah. There are. Barbara Lee in California this week sponsored a hearing on what was happening in a Palestinian West Bank village, Wadi Fakum. And she stepped out. There are a number of, our Washington State people have done quite well because we've made a concerted effort to talk with them. So we don't see always the bad responses on some of the resolutions that come up. Dennis Kucinich was fabulous when he was in the Congress. We've been here for 10 years, so we've seen people come and go. And so it's an ongoing process, to bring people in. What I think, though, is that there is, much more awareness. I think there's much more awareness across the country, and hopefully members of Congress, no matter what position that they take, are hearing a little bit more from the people that would like to see some change in these policies than has been true before.
Just on a personal level, I think you and your husband and daughter Sarah are incredibly brave. I lost a daughter, and I don't think I talk like you have. I think you're wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. here, and I meet many people who have lost children. It didn't take me very long to learn that it's not an exclusive club. And it's a very deep pain that we all share. And anybody who has lost a child has to find a response to it, some way to move forward. We feel very privileged because we still have opportunity to talk about our daughter. People want to hear about her. I would say, give other people that you know who have lost loved ones that same opportunity because that person is present in their lives every single day, every hour of the day. Thank you so much.
If I may, thank you for coming here tonight. Very few Americans know that despite all the cuts in the sequester that went through automatically, and this country has suffered through for the past several months, there are very few who know that our aid to Israel was not part of that sequester. So the money that we're borrowing from the Chinese and from other foreign governments to fund their oppressive and barbaric actions wasn't subject to the cuts that our domestic programs were subject to. The other point I want to let you know, and the other people here gathered tonight, is there's a growing group from Fort Wayne that goes each year to protest the APAC conference in Washington. So I'll be going this spring. So if anyone else is interested, I don't know who they should contact. Yeah, contact Sam.
Thank you.
And you'll be there too?
It's a pretty fun experience. It's kind of a cheerful, kind of thing. There's somebody in the back that wants to connect with you.
Just call Sam.
We have time for one more question.
I think there is seconds. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We want to say thank you to Jewish Voice for Peace and Dr. Pat Ashton and the Peace and Conflict Studies program at IPFW. We want to say thanks to Plymouth Church and the good people of Plymouth Church and Pastor John Gardner and Reverend Ruth Phillips. We want to say thank you to the families of Sam Jarjor and Amar Masri and the two of them for bringing the treats tonight that are over in the Folsom Room. Please join us and join the Corries for some time for conversation. There are books for sale over here in the Folsom Room. Remember, all checks should be made. Please be generous for the Rachel Corrie Foundation. All checks should be made out to the Indiana Center for Middle East Peace so we can write them one check tonight. Especially, thank you all for coming out tonight on this cold and rainy November evening. Peace and blessings. Happy Thanksgiving. Please join us now for some sweets and treats and some conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Well, we've been talking about it.